Welcome, everybody, to the Distilled Security Podcast, episode number 5. I'm Justin Leapline. I'm here with Rick Yoakum and Joe Wynn, and we're glad to talk to you today. Today, we got a pretty interesting lineup here. First thing I want to bring up is we're going to be at TRISS, which is exciting. Got invited by one of the conference organizers, which we're really grateful to do, and really just want to promote a little bit of what we're doing, what we're talking about. Want to get some community feedback with that and everything. We have our booth, so please come by and talk. It's October 3rd.
October 3rd, Thursday,
Yep,
at the Convention Center.
At the Pittsburgh David L. Lawrence Convention Center. So that'll be good. We need to, bring our A game and everything. Are we going to do any interviews or anything while we're there?
I don't know. We'll find some victims.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Rick, you brought up earlier, maybe it'd be interesting to have people give us feedback for what topics they want to hear about.
Yeah, I know we have a little bit of a backlog of topics, so maybe we'll post some. And
it keeps building every time we do an episode.
Yeah,
I think we have like 24 topics that we've put in the trash and what's around here?
So help us curate them.
Yeah, and then the other thing, I was looking at the lineup today, and wow, I didn't realize some of the speakers are going to be there, but there's some pretty impressive talks.
Oh yeah,
I saw just some people we know from the community, Ryan Volok, and
he's on a panel discussion, right? I think small to mid-sized business dealing with security and everything.
And there's a couple other things. There's some good CISOs I saw on the list, and I think some sort of women in technology and cyber conversations happening. And then they're also doing resume reviews and coaching.
Which you're participating in.
Yeah, 9 a.m. I signed up for the slot where I will take a look and beat up your resume. And everybody who I ever looked at the resumes, I'm like, look, I'm not going to be gentle. This is going to be tough. Are you ready for this?
Feedback is good.
So, so that's always fun.
Anybody say no and walk away?
No, that's never happened.
How dare you, sir?
Yeah, so it's typically, and the main things I look for when I'm doing a resume review.
It's like Comic Sans, really?
Yeah, Comic. If you're not using Comic Sans, forget it. You want Comic Sans, right?
Of course. That's what it was implying.
Yeah. No, really, I'm looking for things like if your resume, so getting ready for this, if you're showing up, the kind of feedback you'll get is if your resume reads like your job description, I'm going to have a problem with that. And we're going to talk about it. And we're going to figure out how to make it a little bit more about what you actually accomplished, not the job that you had. And then the other piece is metrics.
It's counter to a lot of recommendations.
Well, I look at
to critique your resume to apply for the position, to highlight the attributes that you're trying to achieve and everything.
100% agree.
Okay.
But if it just lists that I was responsible for...
managed the firewall rule set.
Yeah, basically twist around the job.
But instead of manage the firewall rule set, it's what did you do that impacted the organization? Show me a metric. Tell me something. Did you improve the process? Were you able to get 5 times as many firewall rule sets reviewed because you did something? Let's figure that out.
Work with executives to drop ticket counts of angry people because or whatever.
And it's funny, I've done this on my resume probably over 10 years now. I haven't used my resume in forever. But I had where the job was, I described my responsibility, and then I'd have a highlights, and I'd have a couple of bullet points of what you're talking about with I did this project under this time, this amount of close the project worth this amount of money, whatever it was, type of thing. So the highlights did accomplishments versus I'm in charge of this, and we did this, I
always like something similar is there's responsibilities and there's accomplishments, right? Which is a little bit different. I wasn't fully responsible for this thing operationally, but here's this big thing that I did that helped in these ways or whatever, and kind of separating those out can be useful. But anyway.
That's good. No, and then the other thing I look for is what do you do outside of your job to make yourself better for the next job you want.
So you're looking for cultural type stuff into
maybe it's podcasting.
Yeah, maybe. That'd
probably go down on the hiring,
Well, you look at it the 3 of us, we could just end our day and go home, right? But instead, we keep talking about cybersecurity because we don't just do it for a job. We do it because we like to do it.
Right.
We talk about this stuff because we want to talk about it.
Right.
If we weren't here recording a podcast, what would we be doing? We'd be sitting around with a couple drinks talking about cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So do you do something like that? Find a way to fit into your resume things you do that make you valuable to somebody, but also show you have a passion for this thing you want to do.
Yeah. Or a passion for something else that you can translate.
That's what I was thinking.
Right? So, yeah, maybe you do all this volunteer work. Okay, how does that translate to your skill set? Oh, you have all this extra empathy and you can interact with people, or you can identify issues more quickly, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Even if it's something not in cybersecurity, but you do it in your spare time and it gives you skills that are transferable and unique to you. That's super cool too.
And imagine if you were doing that and also applying to a non-for-profit.
Right.
Because now you're totally relating this whole idea of giving back and volunteering to the place you want to get a job and help. They need cybersecurity as well.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, and I also like even highlighting stuff of like, what are your hobbies outside of the career path and everything. Just interesting stuff. Like I met a guy the other day that he walked the entire Appalachian Trail, you know, from spring to fall. You know, it took him like 5-ish months or something like that. And it's just like, that is such a cool story to tell, you know, type of thing.
Well, and I think that's super important too, because like the way that you connect with people is through stories and like human interactions. It's not like I manage the firewalls.
Yeah.
Like it's just not. And so if you're in an interview and you can talk about something you're passionate about or something you've done or whatever, like you're going to be more memorable. You're going to end up more loose in the conversation, hopefully, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you know, people are going to remember you differently.
Reminds me of a conversation I had today. I was talking to somebody and I'm like, what you really need, and we were discussing like what would be the perfect person for this GRC role that they have open. And I don't know that you actually need somebody who is super technical or super knows everything about GRC. What you really need is somebody who can communicate and go and interact with people, because
you need an evangelist.
About half the job is getting people to get the things done that need done, so you can start removing the risk from the risk register, things like that. You need a people person.
Right.
From
Don't you people understand?
Yeah. From Office Space.
Yep.
So, yeah, absolutely. And then, but back to your story about the guy who hiked the trail. I bet that person's going to complete the projects you give them.
Yeah, right.
They're going to get all that done.
Right. And preparation, all that stuff. I mean, again, you can tie all sorts of things to, you know, if you think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
I bet they're a heck of a project planner, and they finished the work.
They're actually in recruiting for a company.
Okay.
A dedicated corporate recruiter and everything. So, yeah.
So anyway, come see Joe. Let him beat up your resume.
Yeah. Come see us all. Stop by the table.
We're also going to have some stuff we're raffling off. So definitely come by, say hi, enter your name in and everything. We'll might have some spirits to give away, and you have some.
I got a gift card,
money,
I think.
And it'll be good.
Yeah. Oh, and there's an evening event too. DSP is doing.
Yeah, so we are sponsoring happy hour as well. It's at Helltown Brewing, a local brewery. So that will be a good time. So
that'll be can't wait.
Won't be spirits, but you know, it's beer. It's close. You know. So, all right. So why don't we enter into our first kind of meat of the topic here? So, pagers exploding.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Big deal.
So it was really interesting, and I think there was a lot of obviously passionate opinions all over the place about this. I think where I kind of wanted to talk about is just utilizing technology in kind of a counter-espionage type format. And is this revolutionary or not? Like, I was kind of, you know, like there's been the program, the Anon, I forget what it was. It was basically the FBI basically took over cell phones and then started distributing out to drug dealers, you know, all that stuff, you know, over in Europe a lot of the times. And they utilize that as kind of a way to get information. Obviously, this is more on the offensive, you know, rather than information gathering and technology.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think? Is this something revolutionary, or is this just, you know, it is what it is?
Go for it. I have a couple thoughts, but I want to hear what you think.
I mean, I don't think it's revolutionary.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a lot more public and loud and message sendy, maybe intentionally. But I don't think it's revolutionary. I mean, the reason we go through scanners at airports is because very small amounts of plastic explosive, like
the shoe bomb.
Yeah, tried to hide it in a shoe, right? And so very small amounts of plastic explosives can do huge damage. And I think this killed 27 or 37 people.
Yeah, it wasn't
like
huge, but it injured like 20,
couple
500?
in the
So let's back up a little
2000+.
bit.
Yeah.
So the meat of the story, if you haven't heard,
right.
is really that it looks like Israelis created an attack against Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And what they did was they set up an Israeli front company to sell pagers and walkie-talkies, and offered a version that they could distribute to people that they suspected to be
part of that group.
Yep.
Well,
And
do you know the root of that actually went a little bit before that? The Israelis are so good at counter-espionage and just cybersecurity in general, and they were basically hacking everything that Hezbollah had, like all their technology. Like they were intercepting everything.
They were already.
Their leader came out and said, like, we got to go old school because we don't trust anything.
I heard this.
You know? And so they're like, what do we do?
Right.
Like, maybe we set up a company and we'll sell old school stuff.
Right. Yeah. In fact, one of the items from an article I read was that Israeli talked up their mobile phone surveillance capabilities so well,
Intentionally.
whether they were even doing it or not, they advertised they were doing it
To drive people towards buying
old school stuff.
The tech that they could do stuff to.
Yeah. And so is it, what would you say earlier, revolutionary or
novel?
Yeah. It's not. It's just a whole bunch of small supply chain hacks kind of put together in order to get a very high grade plastic explosive inside of these devices.
And send a signal.
Tiered up with the emergency signal, so you put it up to your face and then it would go off.
Yeah.
And so...
And I'd love to, like, a lot of people are like, it's so indiscriminate of like who they're aiming at and everything like that. But if not looking at, I think, the full picture, because once those pagers went off, then they went back to radios. But the Israelis had that too.
They actually,
So the next day they exploded those. So all of a sudden they can't trust any communication.
That's right.
Any communication medium whatsoever. So they went to in person, and they found out that a bunch of the Hezbollah leaders were meeting in a house and essentially blew them all up. There was like 12 to 18 of the top Hezbollah leaders they eliminated in one strike because now they're forcing them to meet together because they can't trust communication.
Inherently conspicuous.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just interesting, like, again, they're doing it to basically get them to consolidate, and go into that. It's very interesting, into their...
Yeah. So here's an interesting quote from Alan Woodward, a cyber expert at England's University of Surrey, said a threat model should always look at the hardware first. So this is like, what can we learn from this? Look at the hardware first, and what's in the hardware. And his question was nobody from Hezbollah going to wherever these pagers were being manufactured, and at least sampling them and see what's happening when they get packaged up? Like, did nobody go to these things? So takeaways. What's that?
Do we?
Right.
You get a new laptop, or you're taking it apart?
No, you might not be.
Yeah.
But but I know large companies, these billion-dollar companies, they're actually going to the manufacturer and checking out to see what's happening before they sign up to buy certain components that are going to go into things.
That's true, but that's still different than like things can still be intercepted en route and blah, 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 blah. So like there's so many avenues by which something like this can occur, right? So, okay, I'm not going to be
scale,
a fake...
though,
What's
to
that?
be able to get all of the... I don't know how...
Because that was what was presumed at the start, was Israelis were intercepting the pagers and then putting the explosives.
But it was actually
they
shifted
actually,
left.
Yeah, they're actually the ones getting them sent out. So, while I don't disagree that it's a good avenue, at the scale they were doing it, could they have accurately intercepted enough of them going through shipping to stop them versus getting it at the source when they're sending them out?
Well, and I definitely agree with that, but this gets into like risk profiling, right? Like how many bad things need to happen for the bigger bad thing to occur, right? In their case, they were intentionally simultaneously targeting many, many, many targets. I don't think that's typically how adversaries try and make their way into organizations, right? They kind of just need like one or two footholds.
Well, what's related SolarWinds?
Yeah.
You hack the source.
Absolutely right.
Let them distribute all the things to everywhere.
Absolutely right.
And put it there. And the things I'm worried about are, well, are any of these pagers getting misrouted, and do they have explosives in them, and do they
Right.
actually go to a civilian?
Yeah.
It could, you know. I mean, they had the contract, so they were delivering it straight to them.
I don't
But-
know. I've worked for some companies that are heavy in logistics, and that stuff is fraught with challenges because how many people know about this thing, right? So you have some well-meaning people on trucks or in factories that aren't part of the end group, and all of a sudden they go, "Oh yeah, this truck's delayed." Yeah, it's the same thing. Just swap the boxes or whatever. Like, I'm obviously not saying that happened here, but it's a situation I can absolutely envision given places I've worked in the past where there's like high turnover and stuff like that. Now, I suspect they have some fail safes in place to try and prevent that sort of thing, but it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility, especially like once you put stuff in the wild.
Well, and I think it's a little bit different. I mean, we're talking about like corporate espionage versus this is all out warfare, you know, type of thing. And,
without a doubt.
You know, there's a little bit different from a casualty perspective.
Right. Well, and the risk profiling thing
exactly,
that we're talking about.
You know. But it is sort of like, to your point of inspecting the device, like, you know, the underhandedness of like some of the tactics and everything like that, you would think they'd cut open some of the devices just to make sure. Like just one device looking at that, they'd probably discover, hey, what is this stuff inside here? You know, type of thing.
Yeah, maybe. It's tough. But to your point, like, do companies really do this from a like U.S. supply chain perspective? Like, oh boy, and then you get into solar winds, and then now you're talking about SBOM for vendors and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. Vendor questionnaires aren't getting to this level of scrutiny. That's for sure.
Yeah,
and they're painful as they exist today. That's tough.
So, do you think we'll see more of this stuff here, or
I'm not
this
sure.
might be an isolated case?
I think it's going to be difficult to replicate this anytime soon because now you have a new threat vector to look for. Everybody who's analyzing this stuff, you know, it comes back to risk. So this wasn't on anybody's threat radar before, right? Like my pager's going to explode.
Well, maybe. Like I don't know what's on the NSA's threat radar. Like it's highly likely that the things that organizations do, because again, they were doing like the cell phone thing or whatever, right? It's highly likely that those tactics, they go, oh, we use this offensively. We need to make sure no one uses it against us, right? Like you build the defensive plays for the things that are in your offensive playbook. So I think agencies or organizations that operate sort of in the physical realm, if it wasn't on their radar before, it is now.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. That's why I don't know if it'll happen again because now it might be, and if it is, it feels like it's too soon to have somebody else.
Also, I was going to say, also, I think it's a unique situation where you have kind of a first world country fighting a third world country, you know, and maybe that's not the exact terms, but you got a very sophisticated actor and somebody that makes crude IEDs, you know, into that. So, you know, to be able to even facilitate this, like two first worlds, are they going to be sending beepers back and forth in the countries? You know, no, they're going to rely on their own stuff.
It is fair. It's asymmetric resource.
Or two third worlds that don't have that technical capability to even set up, you know, something with explosives into the electronics or something along that line. So I'm thinking it's a unique situation where you have basically a very advanced military, you know, with that versus a not so advanced.
Yeah, maybe. But also, like, I mean, this happened. I wish I remembered the specifics, but this happened to like a nuclear centrifuge, right? Where the NSA or the CIA did like,
and that was the Israeli Stuxnet.
Yeah. So like, there's that, and then it also dovetails into like, hey, is this an isolated thing? Some of the car stuff that was happening that I know we were going to talk about, right? In terms of, hey, you know, the U.S. government is now pulling back on or thinking about pulling back on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the White House released just today a statement or took steps about banning Chinese connected vehicle hardware. So another supply chain type problem because And it all comes back to looking at the risks. Where is the equipment and the parts coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And for something like the U.S. automotive industry, it's maybe not them directly. So what I read was not them directly who's buying this stuff, but it's the third parties that it's going into that then car dealers or car manufacturers buy from.
Yeah.
And so this is like going to take years to figure out this very complex supply chain.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think like in the 80s, maybe even earlier than that, there's you probably both heard me talk about this before, but like nobody knows how to make a pencil.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So like even rewind 40 years and something as simple as a pencil, and you source the wood, you source the rubber, you source the metal, you source the graphite, and it goes through all these processes to get to where it needs to go. And then there's all this logistics to get it to a factory. And then there's all these factory processes to smash all that stuff together. There's all these other logistic processes to get it to someone that can sell it. And then you buy it at a Staples. But, in anything else is probably more complex than a pencil. A car is infinitely more complex.
Right.
And you think about the supply chain and the logistics that go into that. There's a lot of stuff that is probably like assumed safe in a lot of ways that that are potential avenues for bad stuff to happen. I don't know how to solve that, but to your point, it's going to take a long time to start to unwind and think through the risk profiling for these complex things that we rely on. And cars is a great example. I mean, tons and tons of people operate heavy machinery every single day without really thinking about the fact they're operating heavy machinery at high speeds. And if someone somewhere could click a button and all those brakes are disabled or engines are turned off or whatever, you've caused complete havoc, particularly in major city centers.
Have you heard about the other related to this that the White House is also putting a ban on, which is the ports? At our ports, there's a lot of Chinese cranes with the ability to potentially have the Chinese remote access into them and be able to take them over.
Yeah, and you think about single points of failure. So like ports, so much stuff comes through ports.
We saw it happen during COVID, and the ports were shut down, and then toilet paper, right? You couldn't get that.
Didn't leak him. She just had a paper that was released about
I didn't
some
see
of that. Fellow IONS faculty member. She did some type of survey or something like that with some of the port of entry things. I think she shared it on LinkedIn just this week and everything.
Oh, interesting.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
I haven't reviewed it yet, but it was on my to-do list.
So if you're, I always like to relate these kind of conversations back to, like, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm a cybersecurity whatever leader at a company.
What do I do about this?
Where does this come into my realm? And so,
don't buy pagers.
Don't buy pagers. yeah. Which, thank goodness, right? But it's what makes up the service or product that I'm delivering, and how far am I going to go in order to check all the things that come into this? So, what can I do to disrupt it? And then when I'm doing just kind of an interesting way of starting some kind of a brand new conversation with somebody I've never talked to before about their cybersecurity program, like, what really brings your company down? Like, what is it going to be a supply chain problem? Is it going to be you don't have enough of some part?
Yeah.
Well, how could cybersecurity impact your supplier getting those parts, or the third or fourth party getting them that you rely on? And how far are you going in order to figure out where these are meaningful to you delivering what you get paid for?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You start with the business impact assessment-ish type thing to understand what's important, what's not. And then, you can start to think through risk tolerance from there.
And then, through your tabletop exercises, I love throwing in the wild cards, and, thinking about new wild cards out there, like, and this vendor isn't available anymore. Now, what do we do, during this, or something like that?
This happened to two organizations, and, this vendor is dealing with the other organization first because they asked them first.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are always fun to throw in, like, and our head admin is not like
on vacation.
Yeah, you can't. He's unable to be contacted.
You're that guy, aren't you, who throws in the injects?
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah, because then it's like, oh, the one person that has all the passwords is gone and we can't contact him. Oh, maybe we need a fallback, type
Right.
of thing. And those are the things that, like, the testing out the assumptions of, like, this will always be there, and then you start second guessing, like, oh, what happens if, type of thing. And then you start, is it that important that you make a fallback plan or an alternate plan or something like that? Sometimes it's not, and we'll roll with it, type of thing. And sometimes it's, we need a plan for that in case that happens.
Sounds like we're rolling to the next topic, which is the importance of tabletop exercises.
No, that's not on the list.
It's not, but
It is now.
You just brought it up. And I like this topic.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, what should companies be doing? Tabletop exercises. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm not the expert on it. I've done a number when I, ran security programs for companies. I haven't done one in a while, type of thing. But yeah, it's you gain a number of scenarios, and there's some like pretty good people. Like I work with Tyler Hudak at Trusted Sec, and he's the king of incident management.
Is extraordinary.
Yeah, and watching some of his, stuff online, like he gives really good advice on what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
If I was to dive back into that, I'd be brushing up.
Should you be watching all his videos?
Stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, good. There you go. So go watch his videos. That's tip number one.
Yeah. How much does CISO get into that? Do you
we do a fair amount of tabletop exercises. And one of the things I like to do in a new company or a company who's going to start doing it for the first time, we convince them it's the right time to do it, is I have this like 3 or 4 step approach to getting to the one that becomes advertised. And the first thing I do is I say to the security team who doesn't want to look foolish in front of their IT peers. Yeah. So I'm like, let's just sit down and like walk through this. How's it going to go ourselves? And then once we talk about the tabletop exercise, let's bring in our IT peers. And then let's talk about the IT things that need to happen and how this tabletop's going to go. And then we'll do an actual tabletop with just IT. And we do all that before we start bringing in the people outside of IT. Right. Because the last thing you want is the CIO getting a phone call that, their team that really looked like they knew what they were doing during the tabletop exercise, that you had HR, legal, the head of PR and communications, and maybe like a COO in. And so you want to get all these other things done. And you want this to look really good. And you really want your head of cyber to look great. You want your head of IT to look great. And then you start bringing in the other pieces. And the part that we just started to expand into, because we now have some people on the team who do crisis management and have been doing that at the executive level for years. Like they can train executives, like a former news director is part of the team. So they know how to train you to be on camera.
Media ready.
They know how to, exactly. And so the next step of it is let's do the fake incident. Let's walk through it. And then let's figure out what are the executives going to be doing. And do they have a crisis plan that aligns to the cybersecurity incident response plan? And then like what you were doing is, all right, well, let's take the CEO out of the mix. Yeah. He's no longer available to make a decision. Right. Now, who decides if we pay the ransom? Yeah. Who decides if we do the thing? Right. And are we prepared? Right. And then wherever that falls apart, that becomes your priority for the for your next incident response improvement plan.
Yeah. I have a passionate opinion about some trends I've seen in this area over the course of the past year that'll probably make some people mad at me, but I'm going to voice it anyway. So I have seen this trend where very large organizations that do like tabletop stuff build these giant facilities, basically these like fake socks, for lack of a better term. And they kind of will fly the executive to this facility, and they will put them in a room, and they'll have these big TVs up. It's almost like this crisis communication center like faux thing. And then they'll like get a call on the phone, and it'll be some like pretending to be ABC News, right? And I've talked to a handful of executives that think that this is like, oh, this was kind of neat, like this was cool or whatever. And my opinion on this is like, well, it
I
might.
haven't heard of this. Huh.
Yeah. There's a. I
Like
know.
fake command center, essentially.
Essentially,
Like,
yeah.
Huh.
I've heard a couple executives be like, oh, it's kind of cool. And my gut response to that is like, well, is it cool because you flew somewhere and like had this theater experience and whatever? And what these our organizations will tell you is like, oh, but it puts them in the hot seat and it really kind of simulates them. And I'm kind of like, but it doesn't teach them anything they're not going to learn anyway in a room. Mm-hmm. The other side of that coin is something that I've started to see just a hair of, which is super cool in my opinion, which is organizations that do kind of technical offensive testing for like, pen testing, red teaming, that kind of thing, that integrate an offensive test with a future IR engagement. And so they say, hey, we're going to do this red team and we're going to try and get in or whatever. And if we fail to get in, okay, we're still going to like still give us access at the end. Like they do all the normal stuff and do all the testing. That's good. But still give us access at the end so we can plant certain things. But if you don't catch us, we're still going to plant these certain things, right? So they leave all these footprints behind intentionally that then map to the IR scenario. And so not really for the executives, but for the technical folks, we say, hey, XYZ happened, what would you do? And they say, well, I'd pull up Splunk and I'd look for these things. They go, okay, do that on September 18th. Show me that you actually could execute this thing. And it turns it from this theoretical thing into this tactical thing. And it starts in all sorts of legitimately practical elements start to fall out. Oh, you were on that server? Oh, well, we actually don't have access to that server. Or, oh, that was like a month ago. We don't have those logs anymore or whatever. Like all these legit things. We say, okay, show me. It starts to, I don't want to say fall apart. It doesn't always fall apart, but it can.
No. Well, I have an interesting story. We once did something very similar.
Yeah.
Well, this one example is one that we did very similar. And we call it a breach, I call it a breach readiness assessment. So we're really, how ready are you to find all this stuff? And so we actually had to pause an engagement for 3 months while they went and put in all the logging.
Because like something happened or because you identified it as a big gap?
Because we identified it as a big gap. So we're saying, well, what would happen if we're going to do this?
Yeah.
And so we started to go through, and the first thing we do is say, well, what are all the systems, where are all the logs going, and how far back do you have data?
Right.
And we're now going to go and we're going to plant something and see if it's able to be found.
Yeah.
And then, well, what we found pretty quickly was after 1 week of what was supposed to be a 30-day project, it didn't get over for like 6 months because we had to wait 3 months for them to go and procure log management, better log management tools, get more retention on the the files, and so on, so that they would have enough.
Yeah.
So that when we were done, they super appreciated the fact that they were now more prepared than ever because they knew and had confidence.
Oh, you didn't just talk us through the steps. You had us,
So very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah. And so that's, I think, the very beginnings of a trend. I hope that people that listen to this or us or whomever, the industry as a whole, turns it into a full-fledged trend, because I think the IR theater stuff, there's elements of that can be kind of useful or good or whatever. But I think like some of that, hey, let's fly you to a place and pretend to be a newscaster, like meh. Or like people were using like, I saw a bunch of requests at one point when I was like working on some of this stuff around like, oh yeah, and can you like use deep fakes to simulate like a news feed about our company or whatever? It's kind of like, well, yeah, but how different is that from us just telling you, well, CNN is saying this about your company?
Yeah, right.
Like it's like your decisioning honestly isn't going to change that.
Now we're hiring actors and
but
or deepfakes or whatever
exactly.
it is.
It increased the cost significantly of a lot of these activities for not a lot of value. But I do think the other side of that, which is like, hey, take what is effectively a tabletop and slowly start to move it to more of a test. Just like what happened with backups, whatever, like 15, 20 years ago, right? Like, oh, you say they're good, but like, can you actually like test them? Like, start doing that with IR. I think that's a really good trend.
Yeah, for backups, I remember where we would request a particular file and see if it could get restored.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So good trend and bad trend. And I think probably some big companies hate me now, but they may or may not watch this, so I'm probably okay.
You're probably fine.
And then you ask someone like, how much time for a full restore? And when the admin comes back, they're like, it'll take a week, for our data store,
Yeah.
They're like, okay, so you'll be out at least a week.
Right.
You get hit by ransomware.
And then
You're
that
okay
admin,
with that
admin becomes your best friend because they're like, I've been saying this for
Right.
years. Yeah.
with terabytes of data that you're backing up and
Right.
all that. It's like, yeah. So, yeah, a lot of people don't realize how much time that adds, especially when you get into big hospital systems with all this, PHI data,
Oh, yeah.
that they're having. And like, there was a few clients that I haven't worked with directly, but hearing through the grapevine that it took them weeks to get back to restoration. I mean, just look at Change Healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
How long it took them to
yeah.
get that, I still, have you guys heard anything like from a entry? I haven't heard.
It's funny you say that. No, actually,
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it, but I haven't heard of anything.
Because it was crazy. I did a few executive briefs on it, and it was like counting up on all the systems that they publicly said were affected. It was like 180 some odd systems that were
It's a
affected.
big deal.
Not servers, like applications that were
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does it affect that many systems? Like, was there core? Again, I just want answers.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll ever know.
Yeah.
Nah.
Probably
It's-
not. At
yeah.
this point, it's like memory hold, and United doesn't want to talk about it.
That's
So-
that's the key.
but as a security professional, I want to know, so
Right.
I want to make sure it doesn't happen again,
Yeah.
type of thing. But yeah.
I think the fact that we even know about it means that the sweep it under the rug engine that
Mhm.
operates in general for a lot of these breaches and things did not operate as intended for
Yeah.
some parties involved.
I still remember the one of the things, like, remember that RSA breach that happened way back in the day where they compromised their keys
Oh, yeah.
to some of their
Mhm.
tokens
Yeah,
and everything.
yeah.
The eye-opening thing to me when they shared that the initial compromise came from an HR partner that they've been working with. The partner was compromised, and they saw
Yeah.
the email chain going back and forth between their HR reps, with that. And they're like, oh, they've been exchanging this Excel file back and forth. I'll just respond from the last one from the company,
Yeah.
up the version, like the version of, they had a specific file name version,
Yeah.
upped it, and then put in a macro virus. And that was the initial compromise. It came from a legitimate source, an established trail.
And
it's
we're
like-
back to supply.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you catch that? Like, outside of like actually detecting the virus, like, how do you, like, that's uncatchable from just a purely
Yeah.
phishing. Like, it came from a legitimate email,
Right.
at that
Right.
point. It came from a trusted source of that. It was like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So was it an insider or an outsider that did it?
It was an outsider. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that company was compromised. So they had access to
Oh,
their full
okay.
email server. And then they were looking through their email and saw they were exchanging emails with RSA.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so they basically, as that person, basically just wrote the email, put a
Yeah.
macro virus in this existing Excel sheet, and then sent it off to RSA, the contact that was already in that trend, and everything. So it was like,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, tabletops. Good, useful, yes, agreed.
Yeah, you
but
definitely
don't do
gotta
the
do
dumb
'em.
stuff and do the good stuff.
No, it's have fun with it too.
Mhm.
I agree with that actually. Like I don't know. I'm like a theater nerd to an extent, and like that element of things is fun. And so for me to say like that
I think
like,
you're the only
fake
one here that
soft
plays
things,
D&D, huh?
yeah, I definitely played D&D. I was a lead my senior year in the
Ah,
high
there you
school
go.
musical. I like that stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Make sure that you don't stop with just the cybersecurity part of your scope. Eventually bring it to the business, figure out what they're going to do and what you need them to do.
Right.
Because they need to make decisions so you can figure out what your next step is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started incorporating, like, when we're manufacturing stuff out of a facility, it's like big snow day. What do you do? Like, we can't, nobody can get in the office, so
Right.
we're not producing stuff. Like,
Yeah,
what do you
absolutely.
do? Type
Makes
of thing.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I want to know? What are we drinking? Rick, what'd you got
I'm
there? What'd you
drinking
bring?
something different.
So we have 1833 from Boone County Distilling Company, Snyder's Flask Limited Edition. There are lots of words here, and they're on a corner. But the bottom says made by ghosts, which I love.
I don't know them.
It just kind of said.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a kind of a made by
Yeah.
Ghost.
Yeah.
I thought it was like Ghost Distilling Company or something like that.
No. Boone County Distilling Company.
I thought he said goats.
Oh.
Made by goats. Impressive. Well trained.
The greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like this a lot. I got this a couple years ago in Louisville. And it is, to me, like this kind of candy / vanilla bomb.
I get a lot of butterscotch on the nose.
Yeah, it is so sugary. And I'm a sweet tooth person, so.
Yeah.
Like just smelling it and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Cheers.
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 Yeah, it has a lot of sugar right at the front, and then you get kind of almost, is it high wheat and everything?
Yeah, I actually don't know the mash bill. It might say with all those little words on the corner.
No, not mash bill.
This is where I get Justin to do the work for me.
Oh, that's it. Did you notice? So this is
Copper distilled only. I know that because it says it on the front.
So this interesting. So it says Boone County, Kentucky,
Mhm.
but the distilled number is
Like the DSP.
IN1.
Indiana.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I bet there's a bunch of
Yeah, check it
whiskey
out.
/ bourbon
IN1.
nerds that know why that would be. Now, well, they moved, but kept the DSP. I don't know how to.
I don't know. Seems like a research project for Justin after the thing.
Oh,
Put it
wait
in
a
the
minute.
show notes.
There's a DSP KY up at the top here. So DSP KY 20,000. So they're a newer distillery. So maybe they're doing like that. They're aging in one place, or maybe they're distilling in two places.
Yeah, it could be, or like a doing business as, and they got the DSP in 2 places or whatever.
But I don't think you need a DSP license if you're not actually doing the distilling.
They might have bought
process.
someone else that had one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could see like commercial things there. Anyway, that is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I like this one though.
Yeah. Well, why you have it open there? Could have told someone.
I mean, I won't say no.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
So what's next onto this here?
well,
What did we decide?
That's a Joe question.
yeah, there were,
Joe's got the list.
well, I like the way you framed this. Signals from noise,
Oh yeah.
threats of school violence.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of this recently.
Yeah.
In local school districts here,
I
getting
think
calls.
people we know have been impacted.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's only been a couple weeks in the school, and there's always lots of threats going on, happening way more than I think it used to as well.
Yeah. Yeah. From my understanding with people that I've talked to that have been impacted by this, it does seem like there's certainly an uptick in the volume of the threats, basically. And we're talking about, schools. And so they're obviously taking the maximum appropriate measures in terms of, hey, everybody locked down in place, or, hey, we're going to get the bomb squad out immediately and check parking lots or whatever. Because you have to treat every potential instance like it could be the real thing because of the consequences if you don't treat it. But I think there's a lot of potential scary impacts from just the fact that the volume of these threats is increasing, even if they're not actual items, right? Like a boy who cried wolf thing, right?
Right. Well, there's two different sides of it. There's the the mental fatigue of these kids in the school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who are having to worry about what is actually happening.
Yeah.
So that's horrible.
Yeah.
And anybody who has kids and your kid's worried, like, what's going to happen, or is something really actually bad going to happen every time they sequester them and lock the doors? But
eventually, when they get callous to that,
well, I would have
to assume,
and that's the other side of it. And so, to what degree do all of these become? All right, that's just another
Just another tornado drill. Like I remember growing up.
The fire alarm went off again.
Yeah.
Or the car outside is beep, the alarm went off again. Nobody's looking to see if it's actually being broken into or stolen.
Right.
Signal
it's just
noise.
a noise.
Yeah.
And it's just annoying, right? So at what point do all these things create the problem where they're not taken as seriously?
Right.
And yeah, here's a metric. I was looking at this and I found an article, and I basically just threw the topic you suggested from the creative name into Google and ended up with an article that was just a couple days old.
Yeah.
And I was surprised. In Hillsborough County, Florida, it's a 220,000 student district.
Which is huge.
And they fielded 260 reports through the state's anonymous reporting system since September 4th, compared to 275 all of last year.
Both of those blow my mind. Even 275 in a single year blows my mind, let alone over 200 in like a month and a half.
And they take like you said, everyone is treated very seriously. And so officials are concerned that with this flood of vague and false threats, students are going to be less vigilant, to your point, Justin, about reporting troubling messages or things they might see.
Yeah.
And what we want to make sure is nobody stops reporting.
Right.
Because the moment they stop reporting, what is that?
Right.
What concerns me is, and some of the latest ones were coming from somewhere in Australia.
Right.
Made a threatening call to a school district, claiming there were some bombs in the parking lot. And then again, from the same area, claiming there was some other problem going to happen, a gun in the school or something.
And wasn't that Springfield was in the news, and they got like 30 some odd bomb.
There's been a lot of attention in that community for political reasons. But
part of it was the bomb threats, and the government came out and said it all came from overseas. That all these threats.
So why is this happening? Why is it coming from overseas? And several thoughts. One, are they testing our measures? Are they looking to see how you actually react when something like this happens? And is this like a prelude? I don't know.
Right.
And, and then the other side of it is how much disruption to every family. Like if I'm getting disrupted, I deal with it, that kind of thing happens or whatever. You're running into something when your kids are actually putting in that scenario.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, how much disruption is there to our economy? How much disruption to the normal daily work lives are we having because of this?
Yeah, if you could quantify like the cost of, and there is legitimate, kids being afraid is not okay. So the mental anguish side of things, right? Plus the disruption just to the typical school day, right? Everyone has to shelter in place or
you're no longer
whatever.
Teaching.
Oh, 100%. And then, okay, let's just assume for whatever reason it's a threat and it happens in the morning and it's identified as false almost within 30 minutes, right? Very quickly. There's no good aftermath of this, right? Maybe the best case scenario, everyone's rattled for the rest of the day.
Right.
Worst case scenario, they see this so often they don't even care.
Right.
Right? They get back to productivity quickly, but the cost of that is exactly what you were talking about earlier, which is, are people no longer taking this seriously, and is it going to make it harder?
It's like people pulling the fire alarm nowadays. You're like, this is a disruption.
I've been,
it's not like, hey, there's an actual fire.
Right,
it's,
exactly.
Right. Well, and I think of, and certainly not to trivialize the school situation because it's a totally different thing, but some of the patterns seem similar in terms of I've talked to so many network people about IDS, IPS, and they just chuckle and they go, "You think we're reviewing all those emails? What are you, crazy?"
Right.
I get a zillion pokes at the perimeter every single day. Why? How could I possibly do my day job and this other thing?
Well, and that's a problem with the noise at that point.
Signal to noise.
Yeah,
exactly right. And so I think about these issues, and I wish I had real solutions. I don't actually think that I do. But I think about these, and some of those patterns seem similar. But the consequence, right, of an issue is so ridiculously high and serious I don't know. I just feel like as security and risk people, like it's things that we should be able to think
probability.
through.
Impact is top of the line.
It does not get higher.
Yeah. But they've been very improbable.
And honestly, I go back to, I mean, even coming back to like cybersecurity and everything. Don't worry about necessarily the noise of it. Focus on prevention and response. At the end of the day, like things happening from an alerting perspective, you got to worry about like your perimeter and your response to if this happens more over than like some of the alerts.
Well, that actually seems like a legit takeaway. It becomes, well, I guess we do need metal detectors everywhere, and we do need like fence perimeters and all these things because, and I was talking to some people that were impacted by some events recently nearby in terms of threats, and one of the things that we ended up in a conversation about was like, does it actually make sense for kids to move things from unsecured locations into the school, which should be a secured location, every single day, right? Backpacks and all these things. If things are like laptops and digital and all that stuff, now there's certain hygiene products and stuff like that maybe they need to move in or not or whatever. But like ultimately, how many things should kids, or I almost think of it like the Westinghouses of the world or whatever. Like, those employees are not allowed for the secured areas. Like they don't move anything inside, right? Like basically there's like outside lockers and you leave everything there and everything you need to do your job is here inside. And that goes through a really rigorous process and never the twain shall meet. Right?
I used to work at a facility like that. You couldn't bring any electronics without authorization, essentially from me, a security person going through the gate. And we had to wear these big, long, what's called smocks. They're basically like uni gowns with no pockets, so you can't like shove things in your pocket and everything like that. They came down to like your knees and everything.
Now, and I hate the impact that could have psychologically on kids, but I don't know what else you do.
Our kids are too soft anyways nowadays, so.
but I don't know what else you do other than say, look, this is a highly secure location, right, where you should be able to feel safe.
Should schools be a highly secure location?
I mean, I don't think they can be an insecure location.
I'm not saying insecure.
Well, I know, but like, I don't know how you draw that line.
Right. Well, I mean, they seem to do a pretty good job now because you walk up to the building, all the doors are locked. You just got to make sure that somebody didn't prop a door open in order to get, so the kid could get their Uber Eats delivery that they weren't supposed to have in the first place.
And honestly, you could put door alarms onto there and different things along that lines. Like, there's a lot of ways you could, annoyance secure and also alert secure, like into the head office there, if a door is propped open for more than 30 seconds or something like that.
But I do think your note on, well, if there's too much noise in the detective channels, you have to move to prevention, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, prevention and response.
Like, that makes a ton of sense to me.
Well, it's like, this is coming full circle. We were talking about continuity earlier a little bit. We're talking about tabletops. And really, it doesn't matter what the incident is that creates the outage. It's what can happen that's an outage. And how do you get back into business from that? So, and I like the idea because every one of these things, focusing on, well, what is your plan? What are you going to do? And how are you going to lock things down and get everybody to a point that they can work? And I was kind of surprised that some of the schools locally didn't go into the same mode they went into really quickly during snowstorms or COVID, where they just, hey, let's just go Zoom tomorrow. And
that's a really good point. Yeah.
But, and, again, you do that, all of a sudden, who's calling off work that has to go somewhere so they can stay home because all of a sudden their kids are going to be home all day.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot of dual income parents that are really impacted by that.
And this is where like the tactical siloed approach really impacts the rest of the world or the physical world, right? And the politics of the situation. Then because then you do that enough times, because I mean, effectively these threats can be basically a DDoS to a school. Right.
And a DDoS that can turn into a DDoS to a company. Everybody's trying to get everybody to come back to work. They're trying to get them to come back to the office. All of a sudden, so-and-so can't go to the office because they have to stay home because their kids have to stay home.
Third time this week? What do you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you add all those up,
the economic
what degree,
impact.
Is a foreign adversary actually creating disruption to our economy because they disrupt our workforce through disrupting our kids at school?
Right. I remember in college, so my college roommate was like a poli-sci major. And at one point he's doing this like Model UN type stuff. And he was basically, as we were describing Justin before, like the inject thrower, like the chief wrench thrower of like something goes wrong. Like what would an adversary do? And I remember at the time, because I was always been kind of security minded and, a little off kilter. I was like, oh, you just need to poison all the stamps. Just poison all the stamps. And this was when like postal mail was like an actual thing.
Did you watch that Seinfeld episode?
Yes. Yeah, George's wife, right?
Yeah. Right. Susan.
Just poison all the stamps and like all these admins that get all the work done, like in the economic impact of that, and you're going to shut down everything. It's interesting to me that as we're talking now, it puts me in that frame of reference in terms of like, oh, you want like a side-loaded approach to impact an absolute ton of stuff. It's the schools, right? Because it is the single most important thing, right? The kids for all these working professionals. And yeah, that's like, I mean, if it's not a national security issue,
why?
Probably should be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's wild.
And that's where I think, our country has shifted tons of stuff since we were founded. But one of the things that I think we've shifted probably in the wrong direction is self-protection used to be more localized and individualized. And now we look for other people to provide that protection type of thing. So, we're looking for grants and funding and, to be able to secure a lot of the schools. And, there's laws passed on what you can do and what you can't do in certain situations. Like we used to bring guns into school 100 years ago. People going hunting would come, with their rifles and put it in the corner of the classroom.
Yeah.
Like how far we've shifted, into that type of mentality.
Yeah.
And the only reason, like, you guys know, like, my political influences, but I just look also at kind of, data from that and how less of an incidence we had back then versus where it seemed to be going the wrong direction, from a frequency standpoint.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I don't want to blow up the podcast, but on episode 5, but it is weird because I think about all these other shifts that have happened, right? So like, I wonder if mental health has shifted over time because we used to be so much more community based. And so people that are like obviously a little off kilter, well, they don't necessarily have access to all the same resources, including firearms and things like that, as everybody else. But now it's potentially that economy has shifted, right? Or even just ideas and thoughts about weird things, like they're easy to access.
And there's been a few books onto that about more the tribalism of people's like thoughts. Like before we had the internet,
exactly, that's where I was going to go.
You had the weird person in town,
and they're shunned.
Essentially. Exactly. They're like they're the weird person, old Eddie, he's kind of weird, you just accept him for what it is, and kind of avoid. But now Eddie can find like Eddies out on the internet, and they can have a collective Eddie.
Well, and like anything else, it's this echo chamber.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And echo chambers inherently drive people to action.
Right.
Whether it's a positive one, like the Distilled Security Podcast, or negative ones, that it causes real concern, or again can drive people to action that they might not have taken anyway.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder that although like people potentially like brought things that could be weapons, but were arguably tools at the time to school before. Like, is that still okay? Well, maybe.
Plus,
maybe
if you wanted to plan something with your buddy that lived a while away, you just didn't text them and they knew it instantly.
Right.
It was, maybe you write them a letter, and it takes days.
Yes.
So communication is like instant compared to
That's a great point. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I had heard, and the veracity of this is not certified, so it could be wrong. But this was a while back, and we were talking about this. We were talking about the school stuff. I'd heard this, I think, last year when I'd heard that some of this stuff was bubbling up more frequently. Was that kids in different countries were essentially exchanging threats so that neither of them would have to go to school, right? So, hey, maybe you're in Chile and I'm in the US and I know you and you know me, but you know what? We're in different countries. And so what's the real chance of this coming back on us? You call in this threat to my school and
So
I'll
what was
call
the
in a threat
initial
to
association, like a gaming relationship or something like that?
it could be anything. I mean, honestly,
Met
there's
on
so many-
Reddit. I'm curious on like the initial like cross, ideas and everything like that.
There's so many forums for these
Yeah.
things, from pick a number chan, right?
Mm-hmm.
To TikTok, to Instagram, to Snapchat, to Facebook.
So you make a relationship with somebody that's in a faraway place, maybe in another country.
based on a shared community,
Yeah.
right? You
Yep.
say, hey, we both play Fortnite or whatever.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you go, oh, I have to go to school tomorrow. Oh, dude, I do too. I just wish someone would call in a threat or whatever. Actually,
I'll do
right?
that for you today. You do that for me tomorrow. We're good to go.
So I
Yeah.
heard that this was a thing that was happening last year and prior.
But again,
years.
you
I don't
can
know
only
if it's
do it
happening.
so often until they start degrading the response.
Well, right, and
That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah, and that's an issue, right?
Right.
That's a clear issue. So I wish I had better solutions. I like the preventative
yeah.
thing though. That's the best thing that I've heard. In terms
Well,
of,
and that's where like they clear a lot of this stuff. Like they go through and validate. They look at source. They look at the validity of the information, who it's coming from. Is it a student? Is it somebody far away?
Yeah, but
And
you
then they're
can't-
like, all right, are we going to do anything different?
yeah, but that's all in post, right? Like you have to you have to respond. I believe you have to respond to the threat as though it's serious until you can run the analysis. And you run the analysis in post, right?
Yeah, but I think a lot of schools nowadays, they already have, security officers that are in the hallway. They already have metal detectors and everything.
I don't want to say, I mean, I guess I will say like underfunded or the perceived underfunding of schools, right? In many cases.
Yeah.
Around where we are, they have that stuff. Now, every school, absolutely. There are a number of schools
Yeah,
that are
not all
not
the
funded.
schools have metal detectors, but they do have security officers, and local police forces happen to get involved pretty quickly.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It becomes
And a lot of
do
them-
they have the resources they need? Like, how quickly do they do these analyses?
I know
Yeah.
we have a guy in the neighborhood. He's ex-Secret Service.
Oh, yeah.
He's retired, but his job now is to go around to local schools and actually give them assessments and remediation plans for
That's
readiness
awesome.
and everything.
That's awesome. Thank that
So,
person for me.
Yeah,
That's super cool.
Yeah, that's what his company does right now, and and they work with a whole bunch of schools to say, okay, how do you get in? Who has master keys to everything? Like, how are we going to respond? Where are the keys located? Like, if all the master keys are inside and you're under like a lockdown, like that's not going to do the cops or first responders any good. You know, so you need to make some extra copies and coordinate all of this prior to something happening.
Right.
So
I love
they
that.
can
You mean
actually-
like a tabletop exercise?
yeah, like a tabletop here.
There you go.
Well, and so maybe it's not as worrisome as initially it was in my head, but boy, I don't love the fact that it's like increasing in frequency.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So any other topics for tonight?
I think we're probably good, right?
Yeah. So big thing, October 3rd.
Yep.
Yeah,
Come to
see
TRISS.
us. Come see us.
Come by the table. Come by later for the happy hour.
Be a good time.
Can't
All
wait.
right.
That'll be fun.
Hey,
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.
All right.
thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know some of the topics that you would like us to talk about, and enjoy. Thank you.
Take care.